Oh, she's going to do it. There's no doubt in my mind now. Nikki Haley gets blown out by 20 points in South Carolina. And, most of us were not exactly glued to the TV on Saturday. By the way, welcome in on a Monday. It's great to be here on KCMO 95.7 FM. Many of us on a Saturday were not glued to the TV watching South Carolina primary results. I certainly wasn't. We knew what the outcome was going to be. But the compelling part of this is that there is no doubt in my mind that Nikki Haley is going to make a third-party independent move when she loses this Republican nomination. Because I'm listening to her speech after she lost in Charleston, South Carolina on Saturday. And I didn't hear somebody who was running as a Republican. I heard Nikki Haley in a speech that got flipped into a social media campaign ad yesterday. I heard Nikki Haley talking like somebody who is going to try to run as an independent.
Today in South Carolina, we're getting around 40% of the vote. That's about what we got in New Hampshire, too. I'm going to count it. I know 40% is not 50%, but I also know 40% is not some tiny group. There are huge numbers of voters in our Republican primaries who are saying they want an alternative. I said earlier this week that no matter what happens in South Carolina, I would continue to run for president. I'm a woman of my word. I'm not giving up this fight when a majority of Americans disapprove of both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. South Carolina has spoken. We're the fourth state to do so. In the next 10 days, another 21 states and territories will speak. They have the right to a real choice, not a Soviet-style election with only one candidate. And I have a duty to give them that choice. Onward. Thank you. God bless you.
You tell me. Does that sound like somebody running for a GOP nomination? Or does that sound like somebody running as an independent? If you just woke up from a 2-year coma and you didn't know what the heck had been going on in this country, and I just played that clip of Nikki Haley from this past weekend, you would think that there was some third party that is now viable in this country. That's what you'd hear. That's what I heard. She was saying the majority of American people disapprove of Trump and Biden. That was not somebody who was saying, I'm going to be, or I even want to be, the GOP nominee. That was somebody saying, I'm going for it, and we're going to try to split the middle here and let the chips fall where they may. And by the way, she might be able to do it with the backing of this group called No Labels. Now, by now, you've maybe heard of this group, No Labels. They are looking actively for a third-party option to Trump and Biden. And the No Labels founding chairman and national political director, Joe Cunningham, said yesterday that the third party would definitely be interested in Nikki Haley. He said here over the weekend, this has been a project to essentially give Americans another choice if they're unhappy with the presumptive nominees, which it appears is going to be Trump v. Biden. Nikki Haley, she's remaining in the race, adding, we are definitely interested in Nikki Haley. Now, does the third-party option in 2024 have a great chance to win? I don't believe so, despite the fact that when you look at the makeup of the American voter, about 25 to 30% say the Republicans, about 30-ish% say they're Democrats, and then about 40% of the American people claim to be independents. So groups like No Labels are looking at that lane and they're saying, hey, what about us? Why not us? Why not find somebody who can get the bulk of independents, who can try to peel from both sides of the political aisle, who might have a fresher, younger face, and see if that works? Do I think it'll work in 24? No. But I don't think it's a bad option for the American people to have going forward. I don't, by any stretch of the imagination. So now you look at this and you say, okay, if Nikki Haley does do a third party, which I believe she is ultimately going to do, And that is going to make 2024 fascinating. I didn't buy it till what I heard her talk about on Saturday night. But now that I believe she's going to do it, the next question would be, who does that help? Does that help Joe Biden or does that help Donald Trump? Well, right out of the gates, I think that helps Donald Trump, and it's not because of the math equation. It's not because I believe Nikki Haley will siphon off more votes from Joe Biden than Donald Trump. Here's what I think it does for Donald Trump. I believe it allows Donald Trump to focus, and it will allow him to focus in a way that he typically doesn't like to. You know, I mean, we've now been watching Trump under a microscope, I mean, for most of his adult life, but as a politician for almost a decade. When Trump feels like he's up against it, when Trump wants to, he can be the kind of politician that is just tough as nails, on point, not getting sidetracked with nonsense. That's when he's at his best, when he is uber focused. And my fear is that if he just goes up against Joe Biden, it's going to become the Trump show. And when anything becomes the Trump show, it's typically not great for Donald Trump because he makes it about himself. And if there's one thing we've learned during Trump's political career, typically when it's about him, he doesn't do as well than when he makes it about his opponent. He made it about Hillary Clinton in 2016, he won. 2020, he made it about himself, he lost. It's not that difficult. This is not like some deep political thought here. This is just looking at the world the way it's been here for the last couple of election cycles. So now, if you're Trump, and if Nikki Haley enters this race, and Trump sharpens his sword, politically speaking, to the point where he's not getting caught up in the nonsense, he's not getting caught up in mocking Joe, as easy as that is to do. Leave that to us, you know, folks on the radio, TV, social media. We'll do plenty of that for the audience. If Trump just makes it about himself, and by himself I mean his tenure, not him literally, his tenure in the White House, his policies, and nothing more than that, and not comedy hour. And if Nikki Haley being a third-party option helps him do that, that is a great situation for Donald Trump going into this fall. Because I know that people instead are going to be looking at this and screaming. And they're going to be saying, oh, no, the Nikki Haley's going to hurt Trump. I mean, she's going to hurt both candidates. But you can't control her. The only thing that Trump and the Trump team and the Trump campaign can do is control him and himself. And if he comes out of this as a guy who is maybe a little more focused, a little more on the ball, a little more directed in what he wants to do and what he wants to say, well, you know what? If you are a diehard Trumper, you should sign up for that 6 ways from Sunday. That's the best thing that could happen to the Donster here coming up over the next several months. So Saturday to me was not about South Carolina primary voters. Saturday was about Nikki Haley and what I believe she's ultimately going to do. And that is launch a third-party bid for the presidency once she loses this GOP nomination. 913-4087-957. That's how you join us as we get the show rolling here on KCMO Talk Radio. Hope you had a great weekend, enjoyed that beautiful weather. My goodness, it was outstanding this weekend. Sign me up for more of that. And we are going to get to also really a just terrible story from the weekend that I don't like to, do this when talking heads or people in the media say, you've got blood on your hands. I hate when that phrase gets used. But I'm going to use it for this next story because to me, it is so black and white. There's not a gray area on this. It is a black and white issue. And I'll tell you who's got that blood on their hands next on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. I'm always hesitant to use the phrase blood on their hands. I don't like when politicians do it. I don't like when media people do it about politicians because oftentimes 99% of the time, something that happened is more nuanced than simply putting blood on somebody's hands, outside of course, someone who killed somebody or did something heinous like that. But in this now national story, I don't know how you can come to any other conclusion than Joe Biden and his border policies having blood on their hands in the wake of this terrible killing of this young woman from the University of Georgia, Laken Riley. I don't know how you could possibly come to any other conclusion. So if you have not seen this story, Laken Riley, University of Georgia nursing student who was taking classes and once attended UGA, went out for a run late last week and ended up getting killed while jogging on the University of Georgia campus. And the suspect, who is in custody, is a Venezuelan native who came across the border in September of 2022, Jose Antonio Ibarra. He crossed illegally into the El Paso, Texas area September of 22. He was released in the U.S. via parole. And yesterday it was confirmed by ICE, and Bill Malugin got this at Fox News, that Ibarra is, in fact, an illegal alien from Venezuela. ICE says that September of 2023, NYPD arrested him. So he went from the Texas border to New York City. He was arrested in September for acting in a manner to injure a child less than 17 years old. What was he doing? He was riding a moped with his wife's son, who's 5 years old, and nobody had helmets on or anything like that. So he comes into the country with a significant other and her 5-year-old son. It was not his son, it was her son. They come to this country together. They cross illegally. They end up in New York. He's riding around, the streets of New York with a moped. No one's got helmets on or anything like that. ICE says he was released by NYPD before a detainer could be issued. So NYPD releases this guy after he's in this country illegally, before a detainer by ICE could be put forth. He now has an ICE detainer lodged against him in Georgia for his charges related to murder of nursing student Laken Riley. So what other conclusion is there to come to outside of Joe Biden's border policies that have allowed 8.5 million people into this country who we don't know? Once again, this is not against immigration at large. It never has been. It never will be. This is about a system that is so wildly out of control. There are millions of people who are not here claiming asylum. They're just here to cheat the system and cut the line in front of people who are actually trying to come to America and live the American dream through reasonable and legal manners, like, apply to become an American citizen. 8.5 million people have said, you know what, Joe's just letting us in. We're coming in. Screw that. And where they are and what their backgrounds are and what their criminal histories are often are not known. And that came up yesterday. Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, was on Fox News, and he was asked about this very issue. Like, what can you do about this? What are you going to do about this? And here's what the governor had to say.
Well, that's the point, and that's the point that I, along with a lot of other people, have been making now, that every state is a border state. I mean, we are beyond frustrated. I mean, you look at what Greg Abbott's doing. He's having to secure his own border at the state. But we can only help if you have a governor of a border state that's willing to do that. I mean, this is a federal issue. This is an issue that the president can take action on. And I know he's trying to blame, inaction in Congress. That is passing the buck. We know that there's things that he can do. The Republican governors that were at the border just weeks ago stand ready to help him do that. We stand ready to send National Guard resources, and let's secure our border and make sure this doesn't happen again. But also, they need to notify us, where are these individuals? Where are these 8.5 million individuals that have come in our country? Where are they? What cities are they in? How are we tracking them? How many of them have committed crimes? Is it going to lead to another violent crime or murder like in this instance?
Those are all great questions from Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, on Fox yesterday, in the wake of this tragedy where this Georgia nursing student, Laken Riley, went out for a run late last week and was allegedly killed by an illegal immigrant, Jose Ibarra, who came from Venezuela. Where are they? I mean, that's a very reasonable question. Even if you're and I don't know how you could be. Because to me, this is not Republican, this is not Democrat, this is not independent. If you possibly think that the policies that this president have basically allowed to transpire on the border is good public policy, I don't know how I can help you here. I don't. I mean, these have been awful decisions by this president on border policy, and all he had to do, regardless of what you think of the Cheeto guy before him, all he had to do was keep policies in place via executive order that were working and protecting the border in large part. It was not rocket science. It was not difficult. It deterred people from coming across the border when they had to stay in Mexico to claim asylum. First off, it got the Mexican government off its butt because they don't want millions of people hanging out on their side of the border waiting for their asylum claim in America. And it also deterred things from the start when suddenly people coming from other countries were like, well, I don't really want to be in Mexico. I want to be in the U.S. So you know what I'm going to do? I'll just stay because if I get caught at the border, they're going to send me to Mexico to wait for my asylum claim. And that could be years. And I don't really want to be in Mexico. So you see what happened here. Joe Biden got rid of these policies because everything Trump did had to be the worst thing in the history of mankind. And instead of just promoting and keeping these policies in place, and then, yes, trying to work with Congress to get some legislation passed, instead he said, screw it, we are opening the border. There have been, depending on the estimates, 7 to 8.5 million people come across the southern border. The majority, we don't know who they are or where they are right now. And we're supposed to feel like this government is looking out for us. We're starting to and supposed to feel like these guys have our back. And by the way, these border policies, which have impacted all Americans of all backgrounds, have had a much larger negative impact on the poor and the working class. And the data behind that, when you look at who they're competing for jobs with, who they're competing for housing with, is indisputable. And if this country is worth saving, there will be a political price paid for these policies in November. And I don't know about you, but I'm not seeing any big marches or rallies on behalf of Lake and Riley this past weekend, which there should be, compared to some of the people who have gotten that treatment in this country over recent years. I'm not an attorney. I'm a simpleton with a little bit of common sense, like just a hair of common sense.
Talk about a bombshell.
And it really depends on the day. But if the Kansas City Chiefs are found in any way liable for what happened outside of Union Station 2 weeks ago now, we have completely failed as a society. Kansas City Star writing a piece here over the weekend, headlined, "Who has legal liability for mass shooting at Kansas City rally? The Chiefs? The city?" And they talked to local attorneys, and here's part of what they had to say. One local attorney, Bill Carr, said the city is almost certainly in the clear. He said Missouri has very specific laws that say you can't sue the state, a municipality, a county, or even a school district except under very specific circumstances. The few exceptions to sovereign immunity, as it is known, do not apply to the rally shooting. He added the Missouri statute allows lawsuits related to negligent driving on the part of employees of government entities in the course of their employment and dangerous conditions on public property. And there are a few employment-related situations in which you can sue under the Missouri Human Rights Act. But I don't think there's any legal doubt that in this case, the city and the county would be protected by sovereign immunity. And the police department would be protected by official immunity. Okay. Check it off the list. I completely agree with that. Now, what about the Chiefs? The Kansas City Star writes here, and let me just point it out before I even read this, how absurd and ridiculous this is. But as I've noted for far too long, and I know my attorney friends get upset when I say it, but there's too many of them. and they're all looking for a payout, and they're all looking for a buck. It is unclear how much the Chiefs contributed to the parade. The public budgeted $1.3 million that include community sponsorships, corporate sponsorships, and the Chiefs. But it does not specify the Chiefs' share, and the Chiefs did not respond to a request for comment on this story. Well, good for them. Screw you, Star. Attorney Tom Porto has previously represented plaintiffs in lawsuits against the city as well as the Chiefs. He agreed that sovereign immunity would protect public entities in this case, but said the Chiefs' status as a private entity that contributed to money to the parade couldn't make them vulnerable to civil liability. He adds here, the victims could make the argument that given the amount of guns and violence in this city, when you stack hundreds of thousands of people on top of each other without screening them for weapons or having designated points of entry with metal detectors or bag checks, something like what happened last week is a foreseeable event. And if a judge found that it was a foreseeable event, then that would open up the Chiefs to liability for putting on this parade in a negligent fashion. If that were to ever come to fruition, and don't kid yourself, there are going to be people that sue whoever they can out of this. I was eating lunch with somebody on Friday who is a prominent business person in this town, and we were joking about how we were sitting right on the sidewalk. We both joked about how someone's going to walk by here, probably trip over themselves and, try to sue the restaurant, the city, the plaza, whoever it might be, because that's what people do. I'm telling you, it's a cottage industry. Watch TV, listen to radio. It ain't hard to find, okay? And it pains me to say it, but it's a reality right now. There are people that do this for a living. They go around, they trip and fall, and they try to sue. And what happens? The businesses and the insurance companies, they don't want to be bothered, and they pay it off because it's easier to pay it off than it is to fight it. Attorneys get rich, people cobble together a couple of bucks, and we move on with our day. It's gross, but it's unfortunately a reality of America in 2024. So someone's going to try to sue the Chiefs over this. There's no doubt in my mind because they're a multi-billion-dollar operation, and that's the climate that we live in right now. Attorneys want to make money, and people are lazy and looking for a buck. But if this were to ever become a successful lawsuit, if a judge in this community was to find that the Chiefs should have seen a shooting at a Super Bowl parade as a foreseeable event, and they are open up to liability for putting on this parade, then you know what? We have failed miserably as a society. We have failed even worse than I could have ever imagined. If somehow the Chiefs as an organization are liable for a bunch of thugs and, sorry, did I offend you when I used the word thugs? NPR is crying somewhere right now as their loser anchors secretly stream our show from their studios. National Panhandler Radio. But a bunch of thugs show up to a parade rally when, by the way, you've done 2 other parades in the last 5 years and there haven't been any issues. And they open up fire. And somehow the Chiefs are responsible for that. The responsibility, obviously, first and foremost, lies on the criminals. And then if you want to get creative with the law, if you want to really think outside the box when it comes to the law in this town, and people will start having the conversation about those who do not do their jobs when it comes to prosecuting criminals in Kansas City. I know that, they're protected as well. But, man, you want to talk about being creative? I would first and foremost look at those who fail to prosecute law in this town long before I look at the Kansas City Chiefs. You had 800 law enforcement officers out there. How many more do you want? To me, that's doing your job. And maybe there is a conversation to be had about these things in the future and, whether or not you do need metal detectors and single points of entry like the NFL draft. I mean, it would be a total zoo. Could you imagine people lining up like we did for the NFL draft at the entrance of the World War I Museum and Memorial to get into the Super Bowl parade? It would be insane. I'm not sure you could turn that around in 3 days, to be totally honest. But maybe that's a conversation worth having. But I can't think of a way that we would have failed more as a culture than if we find the Chiefs in any way liable for what happened in this town 2 weeks ago on Wednesday. That would be such a disservice to common sense. But leave it to the Kansas City Star to throw it out there. Because they don't want to, of course, they don't want to blame criminals. Why would they blame criminals? I mean, criminals are victims of society, especially these criminals. If only we loved them more. If only there was another after-school program, everything would have been fine. They would have never turned to guns and violence and any of this stuff. But, of course, the state didn't give them 17 million different after-school programs, so the kids never had a chance or something like that. And they're never going to point the finger at the prosecutor's office, the biggest failure in the Kansas City region right now, and it's not even close. It's why I said in 2020 that race right in Jackson County was the biggest local race, and it was not getting a fraction of the attention of the congressional races and the Senate races and things like that. And I'm like, don't overlook this thing in Jackson County. This is the biggest race by a mile in this town. And Gene walked right into re-election, and we have been living through the most dangerous and violent time in this town's history. And now the Star wants to have the conversation about this? Or are the Chiefs liable? It's unbelievable. Bottom of the hour, Eric Erickson, nationally syndicated host out of Atlanta, is going to be here to talk about this horrible tragedy. This Georgia nursing student who was murdered when she went out for a jog late last week in daylight by an illegal alien. So we're going to talk to Eric Erickson, bottom of the hour, 7:35, about that on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. Meantime, speaking of the Chiefs, they had a big signing last week. They saved a guy's career after he was wrongfully accused of something that he pushed back on out of the gates. Credit to them, and the media is taking a lot of losses out of this. We'll get to it coming up on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. I love it when you see losses from outlets like Deadspin. I mean, just hack sports operations that don't know up from down, don't know left from right, and they really took one after the Chiefs signed Matt Ariza, the punt god, as he is dubbed, late last week. We touched on this a little bit on Friday, but we were doing our Back to Blue tour stop in Olathe, which was absolutely fantastic. Thank you to everybody with the Olathe Police Department for coming out, giving us a warm welcome, and showcasing one of the great police departments in this region. It was a blast to be out there. But Matt Ariza is a guy who was a hotshot punter coming out of San Diego State. 2022 gets drafted by the Buffalo Bills, and he ends up getting cut just a few months later. Why? Because it was alleged that he had sexually assaulted a 17-year-old during his time at San Diego State. He vehemently denied it, came out dead set against it, but the Buffalo Bills just, blew him out, cut him. No questions asked. Because we live in an environment where the accusation is a guilty verdict. Someone says you did something, and it doesn't matter what the facts are. The public pressure means that you got to hit the hay. Goodbye, see you later, we're done with you. It doesn't matter how credible the allegations are. The facts don't even really matter. It just someone said something about you, so your livelihood is ruined and finished and done. And it's wildly unfair. And I love it when I see headlines like this from Deadspin. And Deadspin is like the MSNBC of sports journalism, I guess you would say. They used to be a somewhat normal sports media outlet that had like decent commentary. And then somewhere around 2016-ish, they lost their minds and they've just become like a far left rag for sports fans. And the reality is most sports fans, the average sports fan is right of center. There is data that backs that up. So they're really catering to a very small sliver of the sports audience. Mark, do you know anyone in your circles that really still reads or consumes Deadspin content?
Not really. I see it shared occasionally, but they're kind of ragged on more than anything.
Yeah, that's what I see as well. So go back to May of last year when Deadspin writes this headline. Every athlete accused of mistreating women is as expendable as punter Matt Ariza. Think about that headline, which was wildly inaccurate. Remember, this young woman admits that her accusation, it's not like the case was just dropped. The young woman admits that the accusation against Matt Ariza was, in hindsight, illegitimate. This is not like, civil case that was, settled behind the scenes. That's not what this was by any stretch. You can't say that, this thing was settled and he paid her. No. Civil case was dropped, and she admitted that her accusations against Ariza were completely unfounded. So this is very different from what you might see in a traditional civil case. So not only have the charges been dropped, but Matt Ariza's name has been completely cleared. And the Kansas City Chiefs, to their credit, picked up this guy who almost had his livelihood ruined by a false and fake accusation. And good on Clark Hunt, good on this entire organization for seeing that for what it was. But it's amazing how media jumped on this, and they try to tear down guys like Matt Ariza, even when the facts don't back it up. Look at that headline from Deadspin. Every athlete accused of mistreating women is as expendable as punter Matt Ariza. Not every athlete who commits mistreatment of women, every athlete accused. The insinuation there is that the accusation means it must be true, and that is false. And I say this as somebody who has 2 daughters, soon to be 3. By the way, I'll tell you when the third one's coming here in about 20 minutes. It is important that we take accusations seriously. Because for too long we didn't, right? For generations, we didn't take, oftentimes, women seriously when accusations like this came forward. But in classic American fashion, what did we do? We took the pendulum and we swung it too far in the other direction, and we made the accusation, regardless of facts, fact. And that is completely wrong. There still is a justice system. You are still allowed to deny an accusation, and the facts should matter, not the accusation. And outlets like Deadspin, they don't care. They just want the accusations to fit their narrative. And when they put out this article, 9 months ago now, every athlete accused is as expendable as punter Matt Ariza. It just makes them look like the total horse's rear end that they are. They're the same outlet that is likely to get sued by the Chiefs fan who showed up in the headdress to the Raiders game on the road back in November. And Deadspin wrote about this kid having blackface on, even though his face was painted half black and half red. Remember that kid? Well, Deadspin is the outlet that wrote about that kid, that he was wearing blackface, and that the Chiefs should put out some statement condemning blackface when his face was obviously painted half black and half red, and he was of Native American ancestry. So it tells you all you need to know about this garbage outlet. And I love when they take big fat L's like they took over the weekend. So good on the Chiefs for signing Matt Ariza, a.k.a. the punt god. We'll miss Tommy Townsend, but we're happy to have Matt here. Lake and Riley, just a terrible story. Young girl goes out for a run at the University of Georgia, and she gets killed by a man, allegedly, who was in this country illegally, crossed the El Paso part of the border in September of 22, then ends up going to New York, where, by the way, he endangers a child. He walks right out of that situation because, well, it's New York. Ends up going down to Georgia where his brother's at. And he's driving around for Uber and DoorDash somehow. He's committing, low-level crimes. The DA there is slapping him on the wrist. And then what happens? Well, now he is alleged to have killed a young woman who was going out for a jog on the University of Georgia campus, Lake and Riley. It's unbelievable. It's just beyond words how tragic this is. Jonathan's in Kansas City. What's up, Jonathan?
Hey, Pete. How are you doing?
Doing well. What's happening?
Okay, so you're asking the question how illegals are able to drive for Uber. I think I might have an explanation. As I mentioned before, I used to be an Uber driver. The requirements to do it, there are some requirements, but it's a pretty short list. One of the big ones is you got to have a driver's license and a clean driving record. I'm not sure if you're aware, there are 18 states plus D.C. plus Puerto Rico that issue driver's licenses to illegals. Many of the biggest states like Illinois, New York, California, the big populated blue states, they are part of those 18. Missouri and Kansas are not part of those states.
Yeah.
But obviously that's still a lot of large blue states that give driver's licenses without verifying immigration status. And that's why things like automatic voter registration are horrible that the Democrats want to push, because what that will do is the second you get a driver's license, you are automatically registered to vote, no questions asked. And obviously that's going to create a problem. I think Pennsylvania now has automatic voter registration. And, in November, that could make or break who wins the White House.
Yeah, Jonathan, listen, I think that those are issues that need to be addressed. You're right. That wasn't the case in Georgia, though. I know that much because this morning we had on Eric Erickson. He's a nationally syndicated talk show host. He's based in Atlanta. I asked him how an illegal immigrant could possibly get a job with Uber and DoorDash, and here's what he had to say about that.
Well, so his brother was charged on the same day that Ibarra was charged. His brother Diego Ibarra was charged by federal authorities with faking documents for permanent citizenship. So it is possible that Uber and DoorDash use the information that the brother provided. And this is speculation on my part, but it makes sense. So they would have gotten around E-Verify with the fake document.
So think about that. He could have gotten around E-Verify with his brother's document that was, of course, not legal. So how much of that is possibly going on? I'm not suggesting it is. I mean, Georgia's pretty good when it comes to being a state and its state laws. Georgia's right up there with the best of them. And I know, Missouri's got pretty darn good laws on this front, and Kansas does too. We have someone here on the text line, formerly in the legislature in Kansas, who says, Pete, in Kansas, Uber drivers must be background checked. I helped pass the law that requires it when I was in the legislature. That's good. But if there are ways to get around E-Verify, as Eric Erickson just noted here on the show this morning, then who knows how much that's happening? Whether it's Uber, whether it's DoorDash, and that's crazy to think about, because how many of us, Uber and DoorDash, how many innocent Georgians were potentially in an Uber with a guy who is now alleged to have killed an innocent woman who was out for a jog on the University of Georgia campus? How many front doors did this guy interact with in Georgia through DoorDash? That people don't realize, how close they were to this individual. And I'm not bringing this up to scare you out of using Uber. I've used Uber. I'll use it again. But I'm just saying this is something that now hopefully is going to get scrutinized beyond the obvious here, which is the open border policies, which should not be red, blue. It should be just an American issue, have got to be fixed and can easily be fixed yesterday by the guy in charge of the country. But it's also about how corporations may be getting lied to by people for jobs, and they could be jobs that have high interactions with everyday American citizens, and you don't even know about it. Breaking news here 2 minutes ago from the Associated Press. Donald Trump appealing $454 million judgment in the New York civil fraud case. That was expected, obviously, but the former president's lawyers have filed the notice of appeal today, this morning, asking for the state's mid-level appeals court to overturn the February 16th verdict in the case brought by Attorney General Letitia James. Trump's lawyers wrote in court papers that they're asking the appeals court to decide whether or not the judge committed errors of law and or fact, and whether he abused his discretion and or his jurisdiction. So Not a shocker there, but breaking news here in the last couple of minutes on KCMO Talk Radio. All right, stick to sports. You hear it all the time, right? Say, hey, what are you doing? Stick to sports. Let me give you a great example of the nuance when it comes to that conversation. People are yelling at Woody Johnson to stick to sports. Who is Woody Johnson? He is the owner of the New York Jets. He worked for Donald Trump. He was an ambassador under Donald Trump. And there are outlets, sports outlets, like Pro Football Talk, writing over the weekend, Woody Johnson supports Donald Trump once again, which is his absolute right. Just like it is or should be the right of those who support other candidates to do so without being told to stick to sports. No, here's the difference. No one other than those far-left media figures care which politicians, players, coaches, or owners support in their private lives. If the Jets owner brings Donald Trump to midfield at halftime and says, hey, Jets fans, I know we're getting blown out again in week 3 against the Bengals, but make sure you vote for Donnie. That would be a moment where I would say, hey, stick to sports. But supporting somebody privately through donations in your private space as a citizen is everyone's right. Right? I mean, that's true for Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. Like, if Taylor Swift ends up endorsing Joe again, first off, I've said for a million times, I don't think it's all that big a deal. I don't think it's the deal breaker that some people make it out to be. If she does that as a private citizen, whatever. I mean, it's not going to be shocking. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's not going to be shocking if she does it. But if at her concerts, she starts talking about how great Joe is doing and what an awesome job he's doing, and oh boy, this guy, I'll tell you what. And when it comes to the economy and our, national security, no one's better than Joe. First off, I think you were a little bit insane. But secondly, it's like I'm paying a ticket to watch you sing, to watch you perform. I remember going to a Springsteen concert over 20 years ago now, and I was a teenager at the time, and it was right after the invasion of Iraq. And, Bruce is doing his thing, and I'm a big Springsteen guy, and he's, talking about the war and how the invasion's wrong. And by the way, he was right in hindsight based on how we handled it, but neither here nor there. He starts getting booed. Now, here's the problem. You go to a Springsteen concert, you can't tell if he's getting booed or if it's Bruce. You just don't know what's what. But even he realized he was getting booed. So he knocked it off. And I've seen the guy at least a dozen times in the last 20 years, and that's the only time in my life he's ever made a political statement that I've seen in person. Because he realized, hey, people are paying good money to see me sing songs that they like. They're not paying money to hear my political takes. Now, he has still been very political in his private life. Obviously, he's done fundraisers and events for Obama, and we know they have a good relationship. They've done a podcast together. But I can choose to consume that podcast if I want to. I would never do it, but I could choose to consume that podcast. But I can separate the music from the individual. And that's not hard for me to do. It shouldn't be hard for any of us to do. Separate the art of the artist from, what they believe in their private lives. But for people to say that Woody Johnson, the owner of the New York Jets, should stick to sports because he has privately supported Donald Trump doesn't make any sense. I mean, the inability of people in sports media to distinguish between political endorsements in uniform and at work and their private lives, like they're just not capable of connecting the dots and making sense of this. A UPS driver should not be delivering packages in a MAGA hat. But a UPS driver can, out of work, show up at any rally that he wants. So we're all on the same page here. We all understand what stick to sports actually means, what you do in uniform during your job versus what you do in your private time as a private citizen. Are we clear on this now? We're all on the same page? Okay, great. Good. 913-408-7957. That's our studio line. That's our text line here on KCMO. Maria Holliday, Johnson County Republican Party chairwoman, is going to be here in a few minutes. They've got a big event coming up next week. Ted Nugent's going to be in town, so we'll talk to her about that and much more. Paul is in Kansas City. Wanted to touch base on the Laken Riley story. Now, Laken Riley is the story that we've been following all morning long. The young woman from the University of she wasn't from the University of Georgia. She was at the University of Georgia, and she was visiting with friends. She went for a jog, and she ended up getting killed on that jog. And the person that is alleged to have killed her is, yes, an illegal immigrant who came into this country September of 2022, Jose Ibarra, 26-year-old citizen of Venezuela. Paul, good morning. What do you got for us?
Hey, 2 quick points, Pete. First, the Associated Press wrote a despicable article basically blaming females for running on this dirt track trail solo. Nothing about the violent criminal. Just basically, you should run alone. I'm a senior citizen. I walk along Indian Creek. I go to the Swope Park running trails. They have become a target-rich environment for violent criminals. I guess my question is, if Manny Arbaca is successful in disarming every Jackson County resident, is he going to guarantee that while I'm on the Swope Park trails, I will not get attacked by a violent criminal, foreign or domestic? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, good question. Manny Arbaca, who he's referring to there, is on the thank you, Paul, on the Jackson County legislature, and has made it his personal mission to disarm citizens who have not broken the law, more or less. It's a good question, Paul. And by the way, the Associated Press article he's referring to is one of the grossest things you'll ever read. The headline here, the same AP article titled, "The Killing of a Nursing Student Out for a Run Highlights the Fears of Solo Female Athletes." That's the AP spin on what happened at the University of Georgia last week. The killing of a nursing student out for a run highlights the fears of solo female athletes. Now, the irony there is that the Associated Press can't even tell you what a woman is. But, that's probably an offshoot of the story for another day. They claim that Laken Riley's murder is a symptom of the unsafe conditions that female athletes face, not a direct result of the lax policies that allowed Jose Ibarra to roam the United States because of a lack of detention space in border facilities. Geez, I don't know. I mean, I look at a story of a guy who comes into the country illegally, ends up in New York, commits an alleged crime in New York, walks out of there, goes to Georgia, commits a couple of low-level crimes there. He's out on the streets, and then he ends up killing somebody. And your take on this, if you're the Associated Press, is, boy, these women that got to go for runs by themselves, that's something. What do we do about this? Boy, you want to talk about deflecting. Woo! Look it up in the dictionary, and you got the AP logo right there.